don't know why.
What does it mean to have a teenage brain? What does it mean to behave like a teenager? That is scary in and of itself. My name is Miss Chris, soon to be Dr. Chris. I'm a PhD candidate for educational leadership, and I have a lot of experience working with teenagers of different ages. I've been a high school teacher. I've been a college teacher. I've worked with students from kindergarten all the way up to 21, 22 years old. So I'm looking forward to sharing my insights, sharing my expertise, sharing the research, and then hopefully learning from you, your expertise, your experience on what does it mean to be a teacher, and how can we connect to these teenagers? How can we ensure that we have positive working relationships with the teenagers around us? So let's get started. So we're going to lean in by leaving room. How to connect with adolescent youth. And part of this means not being so close to teens all the time, not needing to know everything they're doing every minute of the day. I think somehow we're going to make a stronger bond with a teenager by actually giving them some space, backing off a little bit. So part of this presentation is informed by Hank Green. He's a scientist and CEO of the SciShow channel, which is on YouTube. It's a super fun channel. I recommend you check it out. And we're just going to listen to what he explains is the science behind teenagers developing brains. How are adolescent brains different from adult brains and different from children's brains? And perhaps more importantly, why are they so crazy? So let's get started on that.
Being a teenager is hard, and so is living with one, I'm told. No human gets to escape this moody, angsty, confusing phase, and interestingly, such an extended adolescence is unique to humans. Other animals grow up a lot faster than we do. And you may think our teen years are just about streamlining bodies for baby making, but as it turns out, the storms of sex hormones that we associate with the teenage years are only a small part of what's really going on in the teenage body. Most of the action, it turns out, is happening in the brain. Until fairly recently, we thought that the brain finished the nuts and bolts of its development by the time we started kindergarten. But really, right as puberty rolls in, it undergoes massive remodeling. This amounts to several years of neural growing pains, as well as the other more visible growth that's going on all over your body. So take heart, whether you're going through it now, or about to go through it, or count yourself among the veterans of that turbulent decade. Know that the result of the teen years is a stronger, faster, more sophisticated brain. Someone had told me that 20 years ago. Let's start with that obvious scapegoat of adolescent anguish, hormones. That word itself is kind of a lazy shorthand that people use to describe the chemicals that some of our glands excrete that can affect our behavior. But the fact is, hormones have all kinds of jobs that have nothing to do with where you grow hair or what turns you on or whether you feel glum for no apparent reason. Hormones keep your heart beating and your body hydrated, and they make your organs grow and make you grow bone and muscle and skin. What people actually mean when they talk about teenage hormones are sex hormones. And yes, puberty involves a whole series of sex hormone storms, the first of which actually kicks in before you're out of primary school. That's when the adrenal glands start secreting androgens, which trigger the growth and activity of the skin's sebaceous glands, making the skin more oily. Soon enough, more apocrine or sweat glands get activated, increasing body odor. Then comes the wave of hormonal agents that start activating the gonads. For boys, this influx of luteinizing hormones from the pituitary gland get testosterone brewing in the testes, and suddenly that guy has up to 50 times more testosterone than he did before puberty. This also changes the shape of the male body, promoting hair growth and building up lean muscle mass, just as the increased presence of estrogen in girls rearranges the deposition of their fat, stimulating the growth of breasts. Humans are actually lucky to experience the craziness of puberty only once. Many other animals undergo multiple similarly intense hormonal rodeos as they enter sexually active periods, sometimes called the rut or heat, every new breeding season. Some male species completely stop eating during their breeding period because they're just that sex crazed. And yet, all that said, teens are far less ruled than their hormones than you might think. There are other factors at play here. For example, your favorite moody teen may be by turns punchy, angry, depressed, or in a zombie-like fog because of their chronic lack of sleep. Sleep is vital to everyone, but it's especially important for kids and teens because it's during sleep that your pituitary gland releases an essential growth hormone necessary for development. A normal sleep cycle driven by circadian rhythm is regulated by the daytime release of cortisol, which helps you wake up, and melatonin, which helps you wind down when it gets dark. But this biology of sleep timing changes as we age, and as puberty begins, teens' sleep clocks get pushed back. Most adults start oozing melatonin around 10 p.m.-ish, but one study showed that teenagers don't start producing melatonin until closer to 1 a.m. This may be because puberty's hormonal frenzy is stalling the release of melatonin, and could partly explain why so many teens stay up late energized by the night, but have a really hard time rolling out of bed with the alarm. Of course, it's a bit of a chicken and egg deal, since watching reruns of The Simpsons and playing Call of Duty late into the night continues to stimulate the brain, which may further delay the release of melatonin. Still, some researchers are starting to advocate for pushing back high school start times in the morning in the hopes of having more focused students. So we got sex hormones changing the bodies and a lack of sleep to contend with, but increasing evidence suggests that there is something much bigger at work that's making teenagers so teenagery. Their brains. It turns out that brains actually take longer than we thought to fully mature. I don't mean physical size. Our brains are already about 95% full size by the time we're just 6, but more in the sense of the connections inside the brain. Adults, for the most part, know how to make decisions by evaluating choices and weighing consequences. They do this with their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for controlling impulses and emotions and forming judgments. Its neurons chat with the neurons in other regions of the brain responsible for, say, memory or movement through synapses. Thing is, teenage brains don't quite work like this yet. The prefrontal cortex may not be fully developed until your mid-20s, and teen synapses, those lines of communication, are still growing and specializing. They're also slow. As an adolescent brain keeps developing, its axons, the long tail-like parts of the neurons that transmit signals to other neurons, become more and more insulated by a fatty layer called the myelin sheath. This padding greatly increases the cell's transmission speed, and while it helps adults make faster decisions, it isn't fully formed in teens. These changes occur slowly, beginning at the back of the brain, where the oldest and most fundamental brain parts reside, and slowly working its way forward to the more advanced and complicated brain bits. The prefrontal cortex is the last to be hooked up and shaped. So it's important to keep in mind that just because your favorite teenagers stayed up until sunrise binge watching The Walking Dead the night before an exam, it doesn't mean they're dumb or lazy. Their brains are just literally finishing being built. But at the same time, because all this brain building is just starting to peak, this is also when the brain starts getting thinned out. You actually start losing connections that you don't use enough in a process called synaptic pruning, which has led to a theory that this is kind of a use it or lose it phase. Meaning, adolescence could be an especially important time to use your brain, play an instrument, engage in sports, write poetry, learn a language. Because by doing these things, you're helping hardwire those synapses and giving your brain topiary a lovely, lasting shape. Whereas if you're sitting around all day playing Candy Crush, those will be the connections that survive, which you don't need. This shaping of the teen brain.
So I think that video is just lovely at illustrating what is really going on in the teenage brain. Clearly, there's a lot of growth happening, but there's also some underdevelopment. And often we can approach teenagers like they are fully formed adults, capable of making the kinds of decisions that require serious judgment, complex reasoning, and they're just not there yet. They just don't have it.
Being a teenager is hard.
So let's talk a little bit more about the sleep deprivation and circadian rhythms. Hank Green, that we just saw, says teens are likely behaving like walking zombies because their circadian rhythms are going through significant shifts. Their pituitary glands are helping the growth to happen overnight, but those hormones are also overactive. And the sleep chemicals that we would normally see induced in adults and also in children, melatonin, is not being produced at the same time that it used to be. It's shifting, and that cortisol is being produced much, much later. So this is why teenagers have a hard time getting to sleep earlier, and why they need to sleep until later in the morning, and why schools starting early is actually not the best developmentally for our kids. For many teens, they're also playing video games or have access to their phones until late in the evening, sometimes early morning. Those games and those text messages and those emails, those are causing the dopamine centers to go off in the brain, which are also keeping teenagers alert. So this is one of the other issues too. It's not just the late production of melatonin in the evenings, but it's also the reward centers are being hit, and that's helping to prolong students or teenagers staying awake and not succumbing to the melatonin. Melatonin cannot combat both the cortisol and the dopamine happening at the same time. What we also learned is that teenagers are not really just lazy, forgetful, inconsiderate. We understand that the prefrontal cortex, that part of the human brain that's responsible for decision making and judgment, is not fully formed. It's not fully formed yet. So the synapses, which assist with the neurotransmission, are a little bit slower than they are in adults. The teens are not able to process information as quickly or as fully as a fully formed brain. That makes sense. That's logical. Their axioms that are transmitting signals are still thickening with that myelin, that fatty tissue that helps with that lightning fast brain activity. And if you don't have the myelin, if it isn't formed yet, you can't have lightning fast activity in the brain. You simply cannot. In a study that shows a range of different expressions, too, when we're looking at teens who are perhaps expressing different emotions or unanticipated emotions at times where we think they might be rational or should be rational, teens identified anger, joy, madness, despair, hopelessness when they were looking at the faces of characters across a range of emotions. They were not able to offer a nuanced response to different types of emotion, which may be less polarized. So they couldn't see someone as pensive. They couldn't see someone as reticent. They couldn't see someone as reserved or fearful or disappointed. They saw only these broad, polarized emotions: happy, sad, angry, rageful, blissful. They could not identify emotions which were identifiable to adults as an in-between range of the types of emotions that were showed in those pictures. That is a reflection of that overactive amygdala. The amygdala, which helps with the fight or flight response, is active all the time, and it's helping teens to process information as accelerated, as excitable, as heightened, when it's really not, or it's not intended to be. So we also have to look at what an unfully formed brain does to the information that does get processed. So the information that is getting processed is also being processed through a filter that's very different than an adult filter and very different than a child's filter. When your amygdala is overactive, you are looking for something to be heightened. You are looking for struggle. You are looking to react to things in a way that's extreme. Fast money and fast cars. An MRI study of the brain showed that teens were much more likely to be positively reactive, around big rewards, large sums of money, cars, status building experiences. But they were not really very active around thumbs up, pat on the back, sticker on the test that you did well. They were really charged by high stakes prizes and high stakes rewards. And even when those sacrifices to achieve those high status or high symbol items, when it compromised your reputation, when it might tarnish your reputation, it was difficult for teens to suppress that and to understand the impact of judgment and reputation, or of illegal activity. If the prize was too high, if the reward was too high, they could not rationalize the consequences. And so that's another reason why we might see extremes in behavior from teens. And of course, we have to note here that social media exacerbates this. When you see your friends or your peers or people who are outside your peer group, but in your secondary circles, let's say, who have access to high stakes items, fast cars, large sums of money, expensive or extravagant trips, and that's being promoted, then you as a teenager are looking for those opportunities as well, and looking to secure your status as well through these means. So when it comes to teens, don't trust your gut. Trust the research, trust the science, don't trust your gut. Teens are really primed to be emotional. They don't have the skill sets yet to read situations appropriately. They're lacking full cognitive function, so they cannot reframe problems or dilemmas in a way that's productive without adult interventions. We need to understand that they're still developing. They still need adults to help them make good choices. Teens are also striking out for their autonomy. They want to see who they are in the world. So it's our job to help them feel safe with boundaries and to reinforce them in a way that's respectful. They are trying to understand who they are in the context of their friendship groups and their social networks. And so all the time, these teenagers who are also combating not having a fully developed brain and trying to process tons of information, they're also both trying to be an independent and have their own identity and strike out for autonomy, while feeling safe and nestled within a social network that ensures that they will be protected. So this is a back and forth, a expanding and contracting dilemma that's going on internally with teens all the time. Adults should really try to assure adolescents that they don't know it all. I think sometimes some of the biggest errors that take place is when we think we've been through what a teenager has been through, and we're trying to ask the teenager to adopt our lens. At the end of the day, we really don't. Every person goes through something a little bit differently. The experiences are nuanced. It's a little bit of a different dynamic. You don't know the backstory maybe, or the history. So, the adult perspective that, well, I've been there, I've done that, or, take it from me, that's not resonating with teens. Teens are going through their own experience in their own time period with their own set of resources and tools. And so we lose students and we lose teenagers when we try to enforce that they adopt our perspectives, or even if we just try to overlay what it was that we have done and what we've been through in the circumstances that they are currently in. And one of the ways that we can really reach students, our teenage students, is by providing them with authenticity and sincerity, and perhaps most importantly, space. We don't need to be in their business all the time. You should be concerned about your teen. If you have a teen personally, if you have a son or a daughter that's a teenager, if you have someone who's close to you that's a teenager, yes, of course, obviously, you want to be engaged in their lives in a way that you can help to protect them, and also just enjoy their company and learn about their interests. But we do need to move away from control mechanisms. That's turning our teens against us. So, and we also need to be really, really careful. The portrayal of teens in the media, movies, and magazines, they range from angelic to, an angelic glorification. They're social justice warriors. They're out there on the front lines doing what they can to change America. And that's true. A lot of them are. To downright horrifying. They're sociopathic. They're narcissistic. They're hungry for likes. They do and say anything to get attention. And again, these are polarized views of teenagers. These feed into that cycle of thinking about teens in a way that's, 0 to 100. Teens are not negative space who, only develop contour through the passage of time. They already have beliefs, they have values, they have experiences that have shaped them already by this point in their life. They know, a lot of them know that what they enjoy in music or what they enjoy in art is not reality. It's not real life. The songs that they're listening to, or that that they're thumping to, that they're rapping to, that they're rocking to, they a lot of times you will find out if you have a conversation with a teen, they can distinguish. They know that what they're singing about is entertainment or commercial value. And they know that they have a real life with real relationships, and those matter to them, and they are tethered to obligations, responsibilities, duties, honor. So, we sometimes conflate that the way our teenagers dress, or the music that they listen to, or the preoccupations that they have are who they are in their entirety. First of all, those things are constantly changing, as they should be with anyone who's undergoing evolution. True for adults as well. But we cannot assume that we have, we understand the full complexities of a teenager, simply by looking at their exterior or checking their playlists. I mean, that would be insane. So we have to be so careful about putting our biases in check because we think we know, or we assume we know, on the basis of what we see. And your worst enemy is trying too hard to relate to everything that is important or matters to a teenager. And I spoke about this earlier. The goal is to give teens space when they ask for it, and to allow them to show you times when they are exercising good judgment. Allow them to show you the things that they care about, but don't become invasive about it. Don't spend or dedicate 20 hours in your week to learning about some topic that came up one time in the car ride, so that you can have a deep dive with your son, daughter, mentee, best friend about it. And it's disingenuous, and you actually don't even care about that thing. You're not trying to learn about something because you have a genuine interest in it, or you want to try it, or it's something that's worthy of pursuing for you. You're using that as a vehicle to get information, to basically open a door so that you can talk about other things. And the kids are, teenagers are privy to that. They know when you're trying to saddle on too much, and they know when it doesn't feel natural. They know when it doesn't feel real. So, I caution you to be especially careful about, piggybacking on things that you think are cool or popular with teenagers, because, while they may temporarily entertain it, it's not really a genuine way to create an authentic bond with any person, but let alone a teenager. And I think you can have some serious missteps if you misperceive cultural cues, or you try to employ language or use language which is not natural to you, or which is not part of your regular canon. You can be offensive. I mean, you can say things that are offensive because you simply don't know. You don't understand the contextual value of how words are used in different ways when they're used with different subsets or different subcultures. And again, and it's just another reflection of you not being true to you.
The bottom line for the presentation was essentially that, be very mindful of the boundaries that you put in place for yourself, but also for the teens. And then I realized when I was watching the presentation, I felt like I put the presentation together for teens based on my intonation and my cadence and everything. So I maybe had the perception that I was talking to teenagers. So the bottom line is, the way to really form a more natural and a positive bond with a student, with a teenager, is to be useful to that student. So one of the ways that I try very hard to be useful to my students is that I help them look for job opportunities. I help them find internships. I help them in writing their essays, or I help them look up, or I find resources that I think could be useful and I send them their way for a paper that they're putting together. I'll walk them down to, if they were working at a job and they lost their job, I'll go with them to the unemployment office so that they can, continue to make revenue. I prioritize their economic viability. Even though they're teens, they still want to make money. They still want to be able to pay their own way. So, I don't treat them like young adults, but I do treat them like the things that I care about, they care about too. And I don't admonish experimentation. If they're going through identity changes, if they're experimenting in recreational but safe, relatively safe drug use, I'm not villainizing them to a point where, one, I'm denying my own past, and two, I'm pushing them away from, I'm creating feelings of shame, which are ultimately going to deteriorate your relationship anyway, and they're inauthentic. If you if you were a teenager and you did something wrong, like you smoked butts behind the school or whatever it was, you're not going to wave the finger flag at a teenager about doing it, and that's not going to, solidify your relationship with them. You can say, I did that when I was young. I totally know what it's like. We know a lot more about cigarettes today than we did then. Here's what happens with them. Ultimately it's your choice, it's your growing body, but here's how I feel about it, and I hope you'll keep yourself safe. So, that's the direction that these conversations are going with, where they put the onus back on the teen, and they take you out of the position of authority over adjudicating on every area of their life.